Season's greetings to all of you joining us on the final episode of Around the Wickets on ThePapare.com for 2015. Well, we got to finish the 2015 on a rather unhappy note because Sri Lanka lost the second test match after also losing the first test match, thus losing the series against New Zealand 2-0. Whilst Sri Lanka, I thought, were outplayed in the first test match, I felt the second test match, the Sri Lankans had a few important moments that they should have won. There were few good positive signs also for the Sri Lankans, but let's touch on the moments that the Sri Lankans should have won. Now, when they were put into bat, it was up, Sri Lanka were up against it on a green track with pace and bounce. You would expect the Sri Lankan batsmen to struggle against the New Zealand bowlers, but 2 wickets were dismissed quite quickly. Then Udara Jayasundara being run out rather unnecessarily, I thought, just gave that sniff New Zealand were looking for, and at that point New Zealand had got 4 Sri Lankan wickets with the wicket of Dinesh Chandimal, and then that partnership between Angelo Matthews and Milinda Sirivardhana got them to 259, at which point just about 15 to 20 overs to go in the day, Sri Lanka should have been looking to consolidate, but instead 7 wickets down at the end of day 1, and Sri Lanka had the chance of getting to 400 plus. Now I thought that was a massive opportunity missed by Sri Lanka, especially after they were put into bat on a green top where they were expected to struggle. Then when New Zealand batted, New Zealand were 80 for 1, going well, suddenly 90 for 4, then 120 odd for 5, at which point I was a bit surprised that Dushmantha Chameera was not used by Angelo Matthews at all until that 40 runs partnership was realized by the Kiwi batsman. And then Chameera came on and New Zealand were dismissed for 230 odd, giving Sri Lanka that first innings lead, the vital first innings lead. Now at that point, with the 2 innings over, the match was restarting. Now that was an opportunity that the Sri Lankans should have seized with both hands. Sadly, not to be. So I felt that there were moments that the Sri Lankans should have won. They did lose, and as a result of it, they did hand over the game. I wouldn't say on a platter. New Zealand were made to work hard, but 187 was never a target that you were going to challenge that Kiwi batting lineup with, because it was a pitch that was not going to take turn. It was not a pitch that was going to deteriorate a lot. At best, the bounce would have been a little bit uneven, and the pitch would have slowed down. And unless you have 250, 260, maybe 300, you can't be putting a strong New Zealand batting lineup, especially with the world's #1 test batsman, Kane Williamson, averaging 90 in test cricket this year. You cannot put a New Zealand batting lineup comprising of such players under pressure. So Sri Lanka losing that game by 5 wickets, losing the series 2-0, and unfortunately having a lot of work to do and having to get back to the drawing board. But having said that, I thought Dushmantha Chameera, I was always very excited to see Dushmantha Chameera. He's an exciting prospect, a genuine fast bowler, running in and bowling fast off the hand. Now, I'm not talking about the pace of the pitch, I'm talking about the pace of the hand. Chameera is someone who can work up very good pace indeed, and if Sri Lanka is able to look after him, I'm sure he's going to be a match winner. And all what the Sri Lankans will have to do is just use Chameera, Dhammika Prasad, Nuwan Pradeep, Suranga Lakmal, quite a few names, and try and build a good seam bowling attack where Sri Lanka can win a few games outside Sri Lanka. Well, we've spoken about the Sri Lankan batting display, which I thought was rather poor, but then in that batting display, I felt that Dinesh Chandimal is maturing. Number 4 seemed to be a place that he has secured for himself and batted well. He's brought in that solidity, and what really impressed me about Dinesh Chandimal is the transformation. Now we do know that Chandimal is a player who is generally aggressive, who likes to go after the bowling, but it's the way he adapted and adjusted to the demands of Test cricket. Now there was a time that he had to play against his grain in that first Test match, taking a lot of time, but then that's the maturity, that's the class you would expect if you're looking for a long-term test batsman. So Chandimal seemed to be really stepping up to that position, which is good news for Sri Lanka. And also Kusal Mendis, I had reservations about him when he was taken on this tour. I still feel that he's got a long way to go, but let's give the youngster credit for the way he batted. He was gritty, he was determined, didn't look pretty, he was lucky, but then there's nothing you can do about the luck. you just enjoy whatever you get. So if the Kiwis chose to drop him, and if he was lucky, if the catches weren't taken, it's not his fault. So I felt at the top of the order, he did well. Didn't come up with anything big, but he's showing signs of really maturing and getting to somewhere the Sri Lankans would want, especially at the top of the order. Well, the Test series is now over. It's time for the one-day series. It's time for the coloured clothing, and the Sri Lankans will look very different come the one-day series against New Zealand. Now, the first game is due to start on Boxing Day on the 26th of December. Now, I got the Sri Lankan probable lineup here. Obviously, Tilakaratne Dilshan will open. Interesting whether Danushka Gunatilaka or Dimuth Karunaratne, who is being held back as a replacement for Kusal Pereira, would open. It's likely that Danushka may, because he's in very fine form, particularly playing in the domestic tournament. Thirimana is there after being left out of the Test series. He should bat at 3. Then there is Chandimal, Matthews, Sirivardhana, Kapugidar. Now that looks a fairly settled and a strong middle order batting lineup. Then of course Malinga, Kulasekara, Chameera and Mendis. Now this is the probable 11 we are talking about, but we are still not very sure about Lasith Malinga's fitness. But if he is fit, and if Sri Lanka could get this 11 on the field, I'm sure they'll be giving the New Zealanders a very, very strong opposition, real challenge, and will be giving them a real run for their money. Now, talking about cricket and coming home or coming closer home, that's we're talking about the domestic season that has happened or that's happening in Sri Lanka at the moment. I can say it's been one of the wettest first-class seasons that the Sri Lankans have experienced for a very long time. Well, I don't know whether it is the right time to play cricket in Sri Lanka, and also with the weather changing and becoming unpredictable, what is the right time? It used to be December, January, going up to March. Well, they tend to try and avoid November and before that October. So they did start the tournament in November, and then they went on, they postponed certain games. But December, they never expected the weather to be wet, but it's been really wet and it's been disappointing. And you'll understand, I'm sure you'll understand, that this puts a lot of pressure on the players, their careers, and they need to really prove themselves to try and get into higher or at least need to be recognized to play at the highest level. So unless you perform at domestic level, unless you're allowed to perform at domestic level, you won't be able to grab that chance. So the domestic season, I'm afraid, hasn't really lived up to its expectation, sadly, because of the rain. The pitchers are bad, bowlers will look brilliant, they'll look outstanding, batsmen will struggle. So it's never an indication of really the real class out there when you play on underprepared pitchers. So that's as far as the domestic season is concerned. Now, you do know that the elections or the AGM of our Sri Lanka cricket is taking place on the 3rd of January 2016, and what a start for the year. The AGM, the cricket AGM on the 3rd of January 2016. I wouldn't say anything more. Let's wait and see who will get elected, and let's see how they would administer cricket as they go along for the next 2 years. So that's it on Around the Wickets on ThePapare.com. May I wish you a very merry, blessed Christmas and a sporting and a happy 2016.